All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Godley. Appreciate you all taking the next hour for this insightful conversation with the Child Health Advisory Council. Before I turn it over to Dr. Bruder Stapleton, just a couple quick housekeeping items. Excuse me, we have left plenty of time in our agenda today for questions and answers. So we ask that you would use the Q&A function within Zoom. And we will pause throughout our session if time allows. Otherwise, we do have time dedicated at the end of the conversation today for our question and answers. At this point, I will turn it over to Dr. Bruder Stapleton to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome all of you that have signed on to this point. We're looking forward to today's discussion. To introduce you to the Child Health Advisory Council, we're a group of senior academic leaders who've held leadership roles in our departments and our institutions, in healthcare systems, and in national pediatric groups. And we have, since stepping down from those posts, wanted to contribute to the future success of academic pediatricians. And in that vein, we have worked with Career Physician to start a series of webinars on important leadership topics for academic pediatrics. This is the 6th of these webinars. And we also have created a number of leadership development materials that are available with the former webinars on careerphysician.com's and the Career Physician website under leadership development and insights. Today's topic is one that we're very passionate about. Each of us has realized in our discussions that we ourselves have evolved in our understanding and continue to learn about the importance of structural racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are still learning, and today we hope we're learning with you and that your questions and comments will help guide our discussion. We also hope that our material that we've developed through our experiences, that you hear our comments and other materials later, will be beneficial to you as you work with us to achieve a much more equitable academic pediatric landscape. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to today's webinar leader and moderator, Dr. Danielle LaRocca-Rena. Danielle.
Thank you, Dr. Stapleton, Bruder. It's a pleasure to join this webinar and begin our conversation of both our individual and collective roles in achieving just, equitable, diverse, and truly inclusive academic environments that bring on board the greatest talents to address what we all care about, the health of our children. The events of the last few years have sharpened our conversation around the issues of race, the identification of systemic problem of structural racism, that Bruder just mentioned, the progress or lack thereof of reaching truly inclusive and welcoming cultures in our academic circles has come under extreme scrutiny. We are compelled to think about the processes that support matching the needs of our diverse population of children and families with the long-term commitment to a diverse faculty and leadership within our healthcare system, enabled to provide culturally responsive care, forward thinking in education, and relevant research. The recruitment and eventual retention and intentional support of a diverse set of health professionals is critical. The recruitment, we are cognizant of the ever-changing understanding of individual identity, something that many of you have probably thought about, in that social construction of race, gender, and the other aspects of our identities within our culture. We focus today on addressing racial and ethnic diversity, given the history of our country and its intersection with gender, and how we move ourselves and our organizations in proactively, intentionally engaging in needed change. Today's conversation focuses on the goal of realizing diversity in our faculty and leaders in academic pediatrics through structured processes. We spent a lot of time talking about the utility of talks like this, and it is really to arrive at structured processes for recruitment that can be evaluated. Thank you for joining us, and this is only the beginning of our journey. We recognize as a council, and I'm sure you do in your own experience, that there is no way that we can tackle this important topic in just one session, or in multiple sessions even. It's a lifelong commitment. Your active participation is thus needed. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation and Q&A session, and we will also follow up with resources, as mentioned by Dr. Stapleton, and posting on our web of vital discussions in response to your questions to promote ongoing exchange of ideas to fuel improvement in our health system. So let's begin. Okay, let's begin with just broad overview of our objectives. And you see the term JEDI here, which I hope you will repeat and learn. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and its intersection with gender. We want to demonstrate, is there a framework that can maximize our commitment? I'm going to assume your obvious commitment to this, one, your presence in this webinar, and then how do we as leaders achieve the results that we state that we aim for? We want to make this, though, a practical session. So we have developed some tools and would invite you to share your own tools that help academic leaders as yourself. And we say leadership begins at the very beginning. I believe my medical students are leaders, my residents, my faculty, and all of us with leadership titles. But we want to look at practical tools to obtain the best results in support of excellence, of course, which is what we're talking about, excellence in academic pediatrics. And then we want to propose additional resources for continued learning. This is lifelong learning and application to the practice of our organization, and keeping centered our views and evolving appreciation of the role of racism, implicit and overt biases, either racially, gender, etc., and the disruption of the structural inequities that deter us from the ultimate goal of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. Forgive me. So over the next hour, what we will do is have a discussion of the preparation for the search process, identifying milestones, pitfalls to assess the progress of the search, and a specific discussion on the Chief Diversity Officer role, which has emerged as a prominent role nationally, tools to support a diverse search, the role of search firms, and then circle back to this discussion of a proposed framework for evaluating what we're doing. At this point, I would like to invite Dr. Valerie Opapari to please share her experience of the key elements in the preparation that may contribute to realizing an equitable process and outcome in faculty and leadership development. And as participants, I would ask you to use again the Q&A session so that we might be able to pause and have Dr. Opapari and the other panelists comment and be responsive to your questions to make this more interactive. Dr. Opapari.
Thank you so much. So in preparing for today's webinar, we really wanted to give you some really specific ideas and approaches towards making it possible to get a great outcome with the search process, and that is the identification of individuals who not only meet the critical competencies for a position, but importantly, also allow you to expand your talent pool with individuals who come from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, and really improve your efforts at your institution and presumably in your division and your department and your medical school and your university or your hospital to really get to the goals that so many institutions articulate around these areas. But most of the time, most of us have the accolades, we have the goals, and they are posted and we talk about them. And then like nothing happens until that search has to be launched. And then you're playing catch up. You're like, okay, now I've got to try and find a pool. So one of the thoughts we wanted to leave you with is that you should be in preparation mode all the time. Every time you go to a meeting, every time you hear a talk, every time you are invited to be an invited speaker, anytime someone comes to your institution that you can see has diverse qualities, experiences, and talents, that boy, that would be an individual that'd be really good to think about recruiting in the future. You should be in an ongoing state of preparing for this, and because it's a key part of being successful. The other point that we want to make around continuous preparation is you should be constantly building your networks. The committees that you see at national organizations that are devoted to this work, individuals who have specific experiences like Danielle, who you can bring to your institution to talk to you about your efforts and critique what you're doing. And again, the concept being here that it's not something that happens the moment you have to launch that search, but it's something that you're in deep preparation for as an ongoing basis. In an upcoming webinar, we'll probably turn to the topic of retention, and that is similarly tied to the search for talent. You need to be constantly thinking about the actions that you have around recruitment and retention in order to really fulfill the goals that your institution and you yourself set for in this area. Another concept that we wanted to leave you with is that, okay, now you have a search. Now it's time to launch that search. How do you prepare to make sure that search is going to be as successful as possible? We wanted to leave you with a couple of really important points. First, your actions have to be deliberative. You have to link every step and align every step in the search process in your preparation phase so that they'll meet that goal that you've articulated or that's been articulated to you, for instance, from your dean as it regards to a search for the medical school that you might be participating in as yet an example. So what do we mean by that? Well, one of the first things that you'll have to do with any position for any search is to create a list of what are the critical competencies for this position. And subsequent steps should link back to those critical competencies. What do I mean by that? The job posting. Does a job posting clearly articulate the competencies that you've identified? And does a job posting articulate your commitment to your efforts to recruit diverse pools of candidates? Do you link your selection of the chair to serve as the chair of the search committee in that way? The concept of just picking somebody because it's their term to chair a search committee is really poor. You should be looking for individuals that can chair your search committee with experience and talent and the capability to make sure that the process is linked and deliberative from the beginning of the start of the search. Similar comments can be made for the members of the search committee. So in some of the documents that we're going to provide you, we actually came up with 8 specific areas where these deliberative, linked, and aligned steps have to be done as part of your preparation. And Bruder will refer to that later in our discussions today. The other thing that's a critical part of preparing to have a successful search is you really have to, before you start anything, figure out what the rules of engagement are going to be. How are you going to align all the members of the search committee or the individuals that are part of the process to understand their roles and responsibilities and the commitments that they have to make in order to ensure a good outcome with regards to identifying and selecting a diverse candidate pool? You have to make sure you have a deliberative process around confidentiality. And very, very, very importantly, are the members of your search committee or the search process or the individuals that will participate in helping you to define your candidate pool, have they been appropriately trained in unconscious bias? Have they attended any STRIDE recruitment workshops that are around how you remove biases and you are able to identify candidates by working very effectively together? Have you defined the expectations for your membership of your committee so that from the get-go, as you start this process, absolutely everything is aligned and organized and clear? Now, Danielle asked around how do you make it equitable? Well, the way you make it equitable is as you're preparing for that process, not only is everything aligned, but you ensure that every candidate that touches the process is treated exactly the same way, from the standpoint of solicitation for interest, from the standpoint of the packages that you put together to inform them about the opportunity and what's being looked for, from your efforts to help them understand the critical competencies to see if they would match well to the position, from how you treat them on campus and the process we'll talk about in a few minutes. But everything that you do in preparation should be designed to ensure that it will also be equitable for any candidate that participates in this process. So these are some of the things that we wanted to leave you with. I think These are just a few of my opening comments, but I'm really happy because we really want this to be engaging. So I'm going to kind of silence for a few moments and see if there's any thoughts or comments or responses, either from the panelists in reaction or from any of our attendees.
Valerie, this is Bruder. How important is it? To me, it's very important that there be diversity on the committee itself.
I think that is critical. And so I think when you're putting your search committee together, you definitely want people that can represent the stakeholders. That's a given. But yeah, your panel should be extraordinarily diverse, because when you're looking for talent, you need individuals that are not from the same perspective. They have to be able to see beyond. And again, that aligns with the critical competencies. Making sure people understand the position doesn't mean that they have to be part of the same division, for instance. But yeah, you want individuals that are participating in this process that can help you understand some of these concepts of unconscious bias and can help you do the right checks and balances that you need of each other in the process to try and eliminate and help yourself understand what you're bringing to the table that might be actually undermining your efforts to be successful in the search. But that doesn't mean just putting a token individual on the search committee just so you can fill a slot. You really need to be deliberative in the selection of candidates. And I'm sure, Danielle, you might have some comments about this, because we're very sensitive to the fact that it's not uncommon to see the same people being consistently identified to sit on this committee, that committee, to fill a slot, as opposed to an individual to really be engaged in helping you to be successful.
Yeah, I actually do want to add to Bruder's comment. Can you comment a little bit about in the selection of the committee members beyond looking at different divisions and perhaps different schools if you're at a major university, where the importance of matching or being aware of the community around you, the population of kids and families that are to be served, and what role that might play in your selection of committee members, as you're organizing this?
Yeah, you see that
the impetus. Yeah. Just to say, in my comments, opening comments, I said that our reason for doing wanting diversity and inclusion is that we need to better serve the needs of our children and families and communities. So how do we do that in an inclusive way through the search process?
So I think you're right, Danielle. I think that you can do it in more than one way, and there's no right or wrong way, but there are many searches that you'll see increasingly where members of the community or alumni that can represent a community that's important to the school might be asked to serve on a search committee. You can also see that through the interviewing process, where specific individuals from the community at large that you will be serving in the delivery of patient care or in the research realm or in the educational realm that are invited to participate in the process for just that very reason, that they bring a perspective to the effort that would add value. But again, in bringing individuals in whatever way you do it, you must ensure that everybody is prepared for the role that they're playing. They have to be brought in to understand the critical competencies. The evaluation form should link to the critical competencies. They should understand the specific role that they're playing. They might even be asked in their role, perhaps not to sit on the search committee, but perhaps to generate questions that could be addressed to candidates in the search process that would address the concerns or the needs or the interests of those communities. So yes, this is what it means to be prepared. And far too often, it's a rote process. Will you sit on this new search committee? There's no preparation. You go to the first meeting, the job posting hasn't been done, or it's been done by somebody without the input of the search committee and without the input of the stakeholders. It's like a form, fill in the blanks. So really, if you want to be successful in this process, you must take a step back and do the real critical homework, the deliberative work that will ensure every step of your preparation is aligned to ensure your process and your outcome will be successful.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to having Dr. Renee Jenkins. And Dr. Opapari, thank you. I know you've led a department as chair and you've been a wonderful leader in this realm. So we're going to transition now to Dr. Renee Jenkins, who's also well known in the field, and ask her to share her immense experience and the milestones that would actually give you a sense that the process is being adhered to. Okay, that we state that we are interested in jetting and indicate what processes might indicate, milestones might indicate that we are indeed following that. Or what are the pitfalls and perhaps the specific role of chief diversity officers? Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Dr. LaRoccarina. Dr. Opapari has really outlined some of the milestones really in her discussion. So I'm just going to try to underscore them. Okay. And because I think that we want these concepts to really stick with people. So that's kind of important. So it really starts with appointing a search committee. Sometimes you think when you describe that the job description is already put together, the search committee really, if it's a diverse search committee, really needs to be involved in that process. And the audience we're talking to are probably leaders, and very often you may in fact be the search committee chair. And so these concepts are going to be really important as we integrate them into the entire process. So you're a little off course if your search committee is not diverse, as reflected by the gender, academic rank, ethnicity, and other stakeholder characteristics that I think you all have already mentioned. Completing and circulating the job description is a milestone. And the question is, was the ad thoughtfully placed in where a diverse audience was likely to be able to see it? For example, organizations are very much likely now to have diverse membership with DEI special interest groups. So are these included in the way the job description is being circulated? Is there language in the job description that in fact reflects a DEI commitment? I think we've already said that. The competencies, Dr. Opapari has touched on that. At the time the interview is being structured, what are the leadership competencies that are part of that milestone that you are asking about? Are they traditional or are they reflective of equitable characteristics? The first milestone that I think people really concentrate on is when you get that first round of candidates. And you're able to see, did the search committee get a diverse candidate pool on that first round? Or is the pool not diverse in any of the diversity characteristics, including gender? And then another potential milestone is when you are inviting back for a second round and minority and female candidates. What about if they don't decide to continue on that application? And, you know, this can happen. And very often it might be related to what they consider a diverse, a negative diverse climate as part of the organization. So the candidate sensed and, you know, felt like maybe they were being just checked off that box and said, did you interview it, you know, underrepresented category candidates, and you can, and they can check that off. So that concept of sort of non-value of underrepresented minority as it has to do with the faculty, but also as it has to do with candidates. And so what are some of the possible course corrections when this happened? Again, as a leader, if you're the search committee chair, very often my experience have been the search committee has already been asked by the time I came to the table as the chair. And perhaps that may not be the best way to make sure you get a diverse search committee. If you agree to be the chair for the search committee, be involved in who gets selected to be your team, so that if it's a major leadership opportunity, is the community engaged? If you are in a hospital system, that's going to be even more important very often than the School of Medicine. But it is something to look at and to really request if you are the search committee chair. Search committee competencies being defined holistically rather than the traditional use with candidates who, based on where they trained, who they worked with before, their significant research contributions in the field may be more important to how many R01s they have. And what are the other leadership competencies to look at, such as the ability to develop talent or to lead teams. These are some of the unique types of leadership character competencies and characteristics we should encourage people to look at. Does the job description clearly emphasize opportunities for growth and collaboration to promote equity in the department or the institution? If not, by the time that committee is put together, it might require a revision or circulation to more extensive groups that connect to underrepresented minorities and female candidates. An ad, for example, that says, this institution values faculty who are committed to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Candidates may optimally include a part of their research or teaching statement that has a brief description of how they work these into their ideals. So you're really asking whoever applies, whether they're underrepresented or not, what their philosophy is about diversity and how they're incorporating that into their work. You've already mentioned, and I think it's pretty much underscored, that providing implicit bias training to the selection committee is really almost standard now. I think there are very few search committees where that is not addressed, and there's the opportunity for members to be trained. I think another addition, having been a candidate before, is adding some social gathering along with your seminars at the time of the second round interview when you get that far, because you really want to know what kind of critical mass there is within the institution, and that there are other department and institutional leaders who are underrepresented minorities and females, as well as other diverse faculty within the institution. So the final question is, so what is the role of the Chief Diversity Officer? And that's a really difficult one, mainly because there is so much variation on where does the Chief Diversity Office set in the hierarchy? Do they report to the president? Do they report to the dean? Or is it someone who is in a department and only really reports to a larger department? Do they have resources? Sometimes the Chief Diversity Office is somebody who got that added to their already overwhelming plate, and 25% of their time is Chief Diversity Officer. That's not really a lot to work with. And then you have people who have really committed to a Chief Diversity Officer who may have an office with 3 or 4 people in it, and they really have clout and they have the opportunity to be more effective within the institution. And so what the Chief Diversity Officer can do will vary across these organizations. But I think what may be important to the search process is open communication between the search committee chair and the Chief Diversity Officer to support a clear message of the institution's commitment to DEI. Also, is there a strategic plan? At least the Chief Diversity Officer is taxed, I think, with having that overall kind of plan, especially if they're someone who's under the president. And then how is it implemented in faculty recruitment? Is there any survey data to show what the climate is around, or the progress that the institution has made around diversity? And are there some specific programs focused on retention and promotion of underrepresented minorities and women? And then how are these DEI efforts integrated into the excellence in the institution's mission in clinical care, research, and education? Because there's got to be clear institutional benefit for committing to DEI. So those are my thoughts about, what can take a search off course when the intent of the process is to gather the best talent for the position. And I welcome any additional comments from the advisory group to add to that list. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. We're going to move on. And what I would ask the participants, and I see there are 41 of you here, so please, I urge you to put questions here and, as we go through, because what we want to end up discussing is what the framework is for moving us to action, okay? Not just implicit bias training, but has that percolated throughout your organization so that the outcome, which is, remember the title, is realizing diversity, right? It's not just aspirational, it is really preparing for it. So our next council member, Dr. Robert Sarwin, will discuss some practical tools, his own experience. And by the way, our own biases enter some of these discussions from our own experiences. We hope that they are useful to you. But let me see, Dr. Sarwin, we'd love to hear your thoughts and your experience and reflect on what might be useful to our candidates to think about.
Thank you very much. So full disclosure, as a surgeon and as a person who spent—
We love surgeons.
and as a person who spent his entire career at the University of Washington and Seattle Children's, two institutions that have really, in a very public way, struggled with and hopefully made progress in this realm. So I'm, as Bruder said in the introduction, we're learning, we're evolving. And so some of what I'm going to speak about is my own personal experience, what I thought worked well. But also a lot of this has been codified very nicely at the University of Washington website, which I will provide a link to that. I also wanted to mention that, there's, and I think Dr. Opapari mentioned this too, there's sort of two reasons why a diverse search process is so important, right? The first is to make sure we have a process that ensures a number of qualified underrepresented minority candidates, women candidates, and so forth. But the other is to make sure that when we recruit individuals who perhaps aren't in those various demographic groups, that they are also supportive of JEDI principles, that they have an understanding of and a history of supporting that. So while we might not end up with a typically labeled diverse finalist as a candidate, we certainly want to make sure that anyone we identify is going to help us move the needle towards equity, diversity, and inclusion. Some of the things that Dr. Opapari and Dr. Jenkins already mentioned, I'm going to kind of reiterate in a little more specific way. The charge to the committee and so forth is important. The implicit bias training is important. One of the Achilles heels, however, in a search process is often not so much at the search committee level, but at the level of the individuals who are going to be interviewing the candidates. And what I haven't seen a lot of, and I think we really need to spend some energy around, is making sure that everyone who interfaces with the candidate has received some training about implicit bias, and that everyone who interviews the candidates understands that the domain of DEI is going to be included in the evaluation. The evaluation form should specifically have fields, if you will, or criteria where the interviewers will have to try to assess that. That, I think, not only helps with the identifying the strong candidates, but also helps, as Dr. Opapari said, build this culture. It's in a repetitive way. You're constantly educating the faculty who might be interviewing these people or working with these people. I think the instructions to those interviewers could also include some of the absolutes, the rules that the questions you just can't ask. I'm often stunned at the naivete of my colleagues, to some extent myself as well, about what is permissible and what is not. And I think that should be spelled out so that everyone who interviews a candidate understands that. And again, I think the evaluation form that a faculty member or staff member fills out about a candidate should, as Dr. Opapari said, link back to the criteria and the competencies that the search committee has identified. One thing the search committee can do to optimize this, I think, is to identify in advance predetermined open-ended questions that they're going to ask all the candidates about their attitudes or their experience with JETI. And by having a standardized question that all candidates are asked, you minimize the risk of bias. You also facilitate comparison of candidates. And I think that it also helps, again, link back to those competencies. The committee also needs to spend some time in advance determining what are quality answers, what are good answers to these questions, not a specific one, but what are the elements of the answer to these questions about DEI that are so important. And as Dr. Jenkins said, throughout this process, you have to stop and check yourself. You have to assume that there are biases. And you need to periodically, the search committee needs to periodically stop and say, have we been biased in any way? You need to, in essence, audit your bias.
Sarwin, I'd like to interrupt you a second because you're
Sure.
touching on so many important points. But one of our questions that just came through, which I think that you've begun to answer is, and we talked about this in preparation for this panel, is how to ameliorate tensions in filling the particular role, especially when we charge the committees in looking at issues of diversity and inclusion. And I think you touched on some of them, such as standardizing the questions, et cetera. Do you want to reflect? Because I think that was the question that you actually asked us when in preparation for this. So I think it's a great question for you to reflect with us on.
Again, I think by periodically along the way, auditing, if you will, your bias, the group, you being the committee, as well as the individuals on the committee. Another process or strategy that the University of Washington recommends is that the candidates, after they've been through the first interview, get lumped into sort of 3 tiers, minimally qualified, qualified, or extremely or highly qualified. And then at that point you say, hey, and we don't have a sufficiently diverse group in our highly qualified candidates. Why is that? What did we have biases in the process? Are we being too narrow in our thinking? Are we saying, oh, they have to have an R01, or oh, they have to have trained at a illustrious institution or whatever? If we open that up a little bit, might we enable a more diverse, highly qualified group? So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but that's one way to do it, is to use the milestones that Dr. Jenkins mentioned to periodically say, wait a minute now, are we being too narrow? Can we expand this?
I think that's a wonderful lead into our final comments by Wesley Milliken. And what's the role of the search firm? Can't we do this all by ourselves? What is it that the search firm brings that can actually support our efforts in JETI?
Thank you, Dr. Larkin.
Dr. Milliken, but Wesley Milliken.
No, we really appreciate being included in the conversation by the council. It's an incredibly important topic. I mean, we deal with it every day with search committees around the country, and largely for departments of pediatrics and children's hospitals. So it's really relevant to Bob, to your comments, and Renee. I think the realities are no 2 search committees are the same. No 2 cultures are in departments are the same. And so rather than this being an infomercial about using search firms, this is really, I mean, my comments, the way I'm thinking of this, that if an institution or a department decides to use a search firm, I mean, how can they help you? And how should you expect them to help you? You really don't need somebody just to take your journal advertisement list and do it for you, right? I mean, that's not adding to the challenges that a search committee. I mean, to me, the thing I see with every kickoff of every search, with every panel, whether it be in person or on Zoom, is I'm looking at a committee of people who are already committed to 50 to 60 hours a week. And, the work of a committee it is a grind. It requires additional hours. And so you really have to, as you think about building your search committees, you have to think about, are these people willing to stretch? Because to really get at the diversity, the looking at it from a pathology standpoint after a search is over, did we do everything possible to do that? You're going to have committee members that can stretch. You're going to have chairs of committees or co-chairs. I've often found co-chairs, to be honest with you, those committees get farther in this regard than those that don't, because everybody is busy. And so having multiple leaders to really push the process. But your search firm partners should definitely expand the bandwidth of your committees. And I thought I might just offer some practical things we do as it relates to search committees work. I mean, the challenge with academic pediatrics is, I mean, there's a talent shortage. There aren't enough seasoned leaders to go around. And so, the positive about pediatrics is, Dr. Jenkins, whether it's adolescent medicine or Bruder, whether it's nephrology, I mean, we actually know where all those people are. And we can identify every nephrologist in the United States. And, unfortunately, I think beyond the implicit bias training and beyond the charge of the dean or the chair as it relates to diversity, if you really don't expand the bandwidth and you don't have that focus of every nephrologist or every pediatric surgeon in the country as your target, committees can pretty easily settle into just processing what's put in front of them by a firm, or just what comes from the ads or the recommendations from faculty. So to me, I mean, for all those on the call, that's a real litmus test. To me, it's an important one. Like when a committee starts its work in pediatrics, do you have access to every person in that specialty across the country? And if you don't, then I think your process is at risk, because you're gonna miss people. And so I've had search committees that have they've been charged with taking 10 institutions and breaking those institutions out for the people, so that when they all come back together, and this is with or without a firm, but again, the firm should be expected by you to be doing that work for you, and for the committee, so that you're really starting the process with the pool that could lead to a diverse outcome. I think the expanding the committee's knowledge, I think the firm should really be doing scoping calls with executive leadership, with departmental leadership, with faculty, with trainees, so that they can give you some feedback, having done this around the country all the time, about your position description. Is it too narrow? Are you leaving a lot of people out based on 2 criteria that could dramatically, Bob, as you said, dramatically reduce your pool before you've even started? And I think those are things a consulting firm should be doing for you, so that again, you don't unknowingly start so narrow that you get to the end and don't really have the confidence you've committed to what you were trying to in your charge to start. So and I think somebody referenced the RO1 comment. We've moved well beyond the triple threat being an individual, in our communities. And I think it's really, do we have leaders that can build triple threat programs or divisions or departments? And I think that's just a better way for committees to think about it. I think the other thing a firm should really be charged with is persistence. Oftentimes it's an ad, it might be a letter from the chair or from the committee. And that's about the extent of true grassroots candidate pool development. And so, if you're using a firm or if you charge your committee, I think, being incredibly persistent, especially with your diverse candidates. And it could be somebody that's diverse because they've not yet been a leader, and so they may fall short of the established position description. It could be, race-based, it could be gender-based, as far as the URM goals of the committee. But I think I'm thinking of a client right now where really talented, diverse group of candidates that were non-responsive, but we asked the chair to reach out to them, and that we had 3 people engaged just in that effort. And so I really think that's what I was insinuating about this tailored process. I mean, being responsive to what you find in the market. But at the end of the day, when you make your recommendations on to the chair or the dean, you just want to know that, you've really tracked every applicant to ground that could potentially be qualified for the role. And that's, there aren't enough diverse nephrologists, or, the list goes on, for everybody to hire, the traditional definition. But I think what you can do and know in every search is that you've had a conversation with them about the role, presented the role and the opportunity. So I mean, Danielle, those are the thoughts I had.
I think that's a great place to kind of stop and to have, I don't see it. Oh, wait, I'm wrong. I see another. No, we answered this question. Actually, I'll pose it to you now because it reflects that. If we are using a firm to search for candidates and choosing a committee, what questions should we ask to vet the firm and ensure they will meet the needs of the search committee? Since that really aligns with your talk now. And then I'll transition and begin to, we only have 11 minutes left to kind of gather the collective wisdom of this group. So Wesley, do you want to answer that particular one, the characteristics of the search firm?
Well, I would really narrow it down to making sure you understand who's going to execute the search for the firm. I think that's really important. There are people that sell searches and there are people that execute searches, and you have to know that the person that's going to execute the search for you is aligned, understands the real challenges of pediatrics, can demonstrate to you that they have a history of delivering on diversity. And there's lots of lists people send you, but I think if you get granular with that, and again, I think it's somebody that's going to partner with you, somebody that you can trust, somebody that you feel can help you with your executive teams that are going to support packages and things of that nature to truly bring a full process together. But pediatrics is so challenging. I would just say it's primarily the experience that you want to see and a track record of success in delivering.
Great, thank you. Maybe I can have the next slide and try to put together. And again, I encourage you to post your questions and I'll try to be responsive to this. Look, it was a challenge for us to come together and to try to share with you what preparation is needed, which really reflects a full commitment of that organization, not superficial commitment to implicit bias training in the absence in a vacuum, but really to all of the things that we've been talked about. So we talked about preparation, identification of milestones, tools, the role of search firms, and now the framework. So we looked at this in terms of our own reflections, and the structural aspects to this mean, and all of you who are detail oriented can appreciate that unless you actually structure a process and evaluate and have an iterative process, similar to quality improvement methodology, you're not likely to know whether that search process was truly comprehensive and adhered to the principles or the charges that you were given. So that begins at the top, okay? I'm a former president of a university, health science university, and I can tell you it begins at the top, and if there's a top on top of the top, you need to reach beyond that to make sure that there's real commitment, superficial commitment, either at the state level, which is each of our states, because education is often geared in that way, university or colleges, the pitfalls that Renee talked about, you're likely to encounter. So there needs to be explicit stated commitment to excellence. Now, we all have said it, but I'm going to underscore it. The reason we go for justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is because it equals quality, all right? This is not tokenism. It really is because we're committed to quality and excellence in serving the populations we're responsible for. The role of the Chief Diversity Officer, and I wanted to bring this to bear, Renee said it. It could be you just have a token person, 25% of that person's time, and that person may be very dedicated in that 25%. But we only hinted at it in terms of legal responsibilities. I think Bob mentioned what's permissible. What are the things that you cannot do? But in fact, we've seen done in various searches. So is it a legal term? Is it the expertise of HR? Is it the involvement of the community to understand what the needs of our communities are, both educationally and, in my experience, integrated community leaders into that process may be helpful, or at least advisory capacity. You want to know that that goes from the highest level to the department levels. If you have departments that have different views of what's going on at the organizational level, it's going to play out in your recruitment and alignment with mission, vision, and values. The composition, we spend a lot of time on the composition and structure of the selection committee. And then you need to go through all of this at every level of recruitment. That means at recruitment of your department chairs, your center directors, your division directors, your faculty, your students, and others. Because some of the things that evaluate, for example, colleges, medical colleges, is whether or not we've targeted diversity and inclusion and have a match. So we have a core group of faculty as well as students, so that when we evaluate, we can see the holistic approach that Renee is talking about. Helpful may be external advisory groups as well as active engagement, not just at the time that you need them, but throughout the process of community, university, and government partners. And you see the details here and standardized, deliberative, structured processes, articulated relevant competencies. So you might want to detail leadership competencies that are very specific, right? And content competencies. And then take a look at whether your evaluation of your top candidates gives equal weight to that. Next slide, please. And here, and here are some of the things you might want to think about. And this is adapted from a Taub in the social action theory, which says the contextual influences are important, right? What's the environment for gender and racial equity and education and training? What's the individual commitment to individuals in terms of leadership training? And then at the institution and department and division levels, is there an eye on sexual discrimination and harassment policies that actually have been implemented with impartial committees that are broad in their representation? And again, for racial and ethnic discrimination and other protected classes, we haven't talked about everything that diversity means. Are there impartial committees that can really look at the implementation of those policies? Supportive family policies, research enabling funds. You want to recruit people to, and do you have clear policies, and is that reflected in your recruiting package? The social interaction domain is on peer mentorship. It's hard to work in isolation. It's nearly impossible. Do you have peer mentorship? Do you have mentorship from women, other identified concordant mentorship? that creates a climate and a culture of welcome. Safe capabilities, individuals may differ in this, and increased leadership and negotiation and problem solving skills. Are these supported? And then you need to measure. You've heard the word evaluation a number of times. Are you able to retain who you recruit? Do you have an increasing number of mentors that are diverse? And is diverse leadership evident? And it's evident when your climate and culture begins to change. So let me see if we have some questions. I have another one. If leadership selects or recruits you as a DEI officer, what are best practice for ensuring commitment? Anyone can answer, but Dr. Jenkins, that seems to be aimed at you. You're muted, Dr. Jenkins.
I think that's very variable, but I think a good place to start is the AAMC has on its website several references on the potential role of the Chief Diversity Officer and what kind of strategies one takes when you take a job like that. But the another article I read said that the most Chief Diversity Officers last about 1.5 years. So that to me means that it's still a fairly unstable population in terms of the types of resources they need to do the job. I think when the Chief Diversity Officer comes on board, people have a lot of modified expectations that are certainly not consistent. So it's important to really have a good communication as to what the expectation is going to be of the Chief Diversity Officer. And again, that they get sufficient resources to accomplish those tasks.
Great, thank you. We reference legal representation in the Chief Diversity Offices that are more comprehensive, but there is a question here, and I know, Valerie, you're beginning to answer this and typing your answer, but perhaps you can say out loud. The question is, many institutions in various states and for legal reasons have put in place barriers to addressing DEI via diversity statements and job posting. Any recommendations? And I think we all can jump into that, but Valerie, do you want to start?
Yeah, I was just starting to type and was going to reference some of the work of Scott Page. So it has been, there is science around this. There is evidence around this. When you have diverse teams, experience, gender, underrepresented minorities, they accomplish goals much faster, much better, more innovative. They're better talent teams. So if you can focus in your description of what you're hoping to bring, which is diversity at every level in this search, you can maybe get around a little bit. But by doing that, you're actually going to be successful because that's what the evidence shows. So I'd encourage you to read some of Scott's work because we're failing when we bring everybody into the team that looks the same, was trained the same, has the same life experiences. They just don't think innovatively and out of the box and create the kind of talent that you need. One suggestion.
Right. And I think your legal team can also tell you, obviously most of the postings are equal opportunity, that this is your institution is an equal opportunity institution. And I think looking at the competencies, the leadership competencies, the ability to put teams together that can really answer key, for example, morbidity, mortality questions around the community needs, maybe ways, as Valerie says, that you can address this issue. Now I am looking and I am the timekeeper as well. So this is just the beginning of our conversation. Please post your questions. Thank you for participating. We apologize that the discussion is short, but I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Stapleton for his closing comments and let you know that we are committed to partnering with you in this journey.
Bruder, I think you're on mute.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there we go.
So thank you, Dr. Laura Karina. I apologize for that. We wanted to make the audience aware of two resources that we have put together, and there will be more on our website. But the second of them, called JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is a checklist. It's a rather high-level listing of steps that one can see if they're moving along and taking advantage of the appropriate steps in having a diverse search. The P2SCCS, credit Dr. Opapari with that monograph, are 8 areas in terms of preparation, process, selection, commitment, and candidate support. And it's granular enough that I think it allows you to follow the search and see how you're doing, and reminding yourself of really important aspects of the search, not only for diverse candidates, but for all candidates. And I think, you know, the goal is to help faculty and leadership be excellent, and to take advantage of a diverse workforce. And sometimes I think our conversation we tend to be thinking of chairs and division chiefs, but you know, the vast majority of searches are for faculty. And we tend to not, sometimes in my experience, people are not as well prepared for these searches for faculty, because that's how you build a culture of inclusion, is by having a diverse faculty. And so I encourage you to think of that. So we are very interested. We are very interested in getting your feedback. The next webinar is going to be on retention, which has been requested by several people who have participated in our previous webinars. We encourage you to send your questions, and we will respond to them, and encourage you to look at our resources on the careerphysician.com website. So I want to thank everyone for participating, thank the panelists for their excellent discussion, and particularly Dr. LaRocca for all the work she did on this. I think this has been a very inspiring and thought-provoking discussion, and we hope that you'll continue that discussion with us, as has been said. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.